Welcome to the channel. What was that? When we talk about the ancient East, everyone immediately remembers the mighty Hittites or the Mycenaean Greeks, but the vast territory between them was considered just a buffer zone. For years, historians ignored this region. But today, we are going to break this stereotype. In this episode, we will dismantle the history of the Luwian civilization piece by piece. We will find out why it was underestimated for so long. Hit the subscribe button and leave a like for the algorithms. Ready? Well, let's get started. The geographic range of the Luwian culture covered a huge territory. According to modern spatial estimates, it was approximately 250,000 square kilometers. This area combined exceeds the size of the Central Hittite Kingdom, the scattered Mycenaean city-states, and Minoan Crete put together. But despite this incredible territory, for a long time, Western Anatolia remained a blank spot on the archaeological map of the Mediterranean. This was due to a combination of factors. There were ecological and logistical limitations for conducting large-scale fieldwork. There were political circumstances, and also the traditional focus of classical archaeology on excavating ancient Greek and Roman sites. A real revolution in understanding the demographic and urban potential of the Luwian lands occurred thanks to the introduction of modern geographic information systems and relational databases. The Luwian Studies Project initiated the creation of a comprehensive digital catalogue called the Luwian Atlas. It aggregated scattered data from dozens of excavations. The methodology for creating this database included a complex process of extraction, transformation, and loading. This allowed converting proprietary formats into standardized SQL structures, ensuring the semantic interoperability of the data, or, in simple words, to create this database, they took a lot of information from various closed sources. They translated it into one understandable language and put it on the shelves. Now all these data work together smoothly, like a single mechanism. And I must say, they work quite well. Thanks to this work, 483 large settlements of the Middle and Late Bronze Age in Western Anatolia were verified and geolocated. The spatial distribution of these identified settlements demonstrates an extremely high level of urban planning. It shows a deep understanding of logistics and adaptation to topographic conditions. For example, we can see that along the main inland trade routes, settlements were located at a regular interval of about 17 kilometers. This perfectly corresponded to a single day of travel for a merchant caravan of that time. And on the Aegean coast, cities were purposefully built near deep-water natural harbors. They formed regional, logistical, and commercial hubs, right where several geographical and resource advantages converged. But before we dive into the economics and political life of the Luwians, let's first understand who the creators of the Luwian cities were, and where did they come from in Anatolia. Here, the latest paleogenetic studies will come to our aid. For a long time, the classic migration paradigm prevailed. According to it, the ancestors of the Luwians were not absolute autochthons. They invaded the peninsula from the outside, probably through the Balkans or the Caucasus in the 3rd millennium BC. This was assumed because the Luwian language belongs to the Anatolian branch of the Indo-European language family, and based on this, the assumption was quite logical. However, recent paleogenetic studies have radically changed these views. Specifically, an unprecedentedly large-scale analysis of ancient DNA published in the journal Science in 2022. Geneticists discovered that the Bronze Age Anatolian population, including the regions inhabited by the Luwians and Hittites, had practically no genetic admixture from the steppe herders of the Yamnaya culture. These genes are the markers for all other waves of Indo-European migrations. Instead, the gene pool of Bronze Age Anatolians shows a deep, continuous affinity with the local populations of Western Asia and the Caucasus. This means that the people who likely migrated from the South Caucasus or eastern regions in the 4th to 3rd millennium BC were not yet Luwians. They were speakers of the Proto-Indo-Anatolian language. This was an ancient community that hadn't even split into Hittites, Luwians, and Palaic people yet. These ancestors of the Luwians genetically almost completely dissolved into the local Neolithic population, but they passed their language on to them. Thus, in a genetic and demographic sense, the population that would build powerful Luwian cities hundreds of years later was mostly local. They were deeply rooted in the Western Asian substrate rather than newcomers from afar. Accordingly, the Luwian civilization formed as an organic synthesis. Their language was Indo-European, but their genetic profile and the basis of their material culture had deep autochthonous Anatolian roots, generally speaking about the language. Luwian is one of the most important branches of the Anatolian group of the Indo-European language family. It is the closest phylogenetic relative of the Hittite, Palaic, and later the Lycian and Lydian languages. And in my opinion, the most interesting thing about this language is its written tradition. It has no analogues in the region. Yes, Luwian was recorded in parallel by two completely different and typologically unrelated writing systems. One was the Mesopotamian syllabic cuneiform, and the other was the original local Anatolian hieroglyphs. The cuneiform Luwian language is known to the modern scientific world primarily thanks to archived discoveries in the Hittite capital, Hadussar. These date back to around 1650 to 1200 BC. This corpus of texts consists mostly of descriptions of religious rituals, magical incantations, and mythological fragments. Interestingly, Luwian passages were often integrated directly into Hittite state documents. Scribes mark such transitions with the adverb luili, meaning in Luwian, or they mark specific Luwian loanwords with special signs, the so-called gloss wedges. By the way, the growing number of such glosses in 13th century BC texts might indicate that the Luwian language was gradually replacing Hittite in everyday and administrative use. As for the Luwian hieroglyphs, they were developed and used for a different purpose. They were used to create monumental state propaganda. Inscriptions on rocks, monumental architectural orthostats, and elite personal seals were made exclusively using hieroglyphs. In general, the exact origin of this hieroglyphic writing remains a subject of debate. Some scholars suggest a connection with Cretan hieroglyphs, while the majority lean towards the idea of its autochthonous, independent Anatolian invention. From a grammatical point of view, the Luwian language retained many ancient features, but also added its own innovations. Their noun system was quite pragmatic. Instead of the genders we are used to, words were simply divided into animate and inanimate. They had singular, plural, and 6 cases. Another interesting detail is how they indicated ownership. The Luwians had special words with special endings for this, which distinguished them from other related languages like Hittite. In Indo-European languages, to show that something belongs to someone, the genitive case is usually used. The Hittites did exactly that, but the Luwians went a different way. They very often turned a noun into an adjective simply by adding a suffix to it. This tendency to turn everything into adjectives instead of using cases became a real trademark of the Luwian language. By the way, a similar approach prevailed in the Sumerian language. But unlike Luwian, the Sumerians did not rework the word, turning the object itself into its attribute. They simply added a separate particle that was supposed to indicate the owner. But the most interesting thing is that we still do not know Luwian perfectly. Today, leading scholars like Elizabeth Rieken and Ilya Yakubovich are leading a massive project. Their goal is to combine all ancient texts into a single computer database to write the first comprehensive grammar of the Luwian language in history. But as far as I understand, we are still a long way from that. The political history of the Luwians differs from the history of their neighbors in that it was never characterized by the existence of a single, strictly centralized empire. Rather, it was a dynamic network of interconnected regional kingdoms, principalities, and confederations. They were united by a common language, religion, and material culture. Troy is traditionally considered a landmark Luwian settlement of the Bronze Age. It is known in official Hittite diplomatic documents as Wiluza. Thanks to its strategic location near the Dardanelles Strait, Troy could control vital maritime communications between the Aegean and Black Seas. However, Troy was just one of many powerful centers. Typical examples of inland Luwian settlements are Sidima Hoyak and Tavsanli Hoyak. These sites, excavated by rescue archaeological expeditions, revealed complex architectural complexes, advanced fortifications, and a rich material culture. The architecture of large Luwian settlements was characterized by the presence of fortified citadels where elite residences were located. This undeniably indicates a deep social stratification. There was a division between the military agrarian elite and the general population who cultivated the surrounding agricultural lands. The citadels served not only as defensive structures, but also as centers for the redistribution and consumption of wealth. They physically separated the rulers from their subjects. Exceptional archaeological discoveries made during 2024 and 2025 provide new, compelling evidence. They prove the complexity of the economic and spiritual culture of the early stages of Western Anatolia. Notably, during excavations in Tavsanli Hoyak, a 400-year-old cylindrical faience seal was discovered. It dates back to the period of the Assyrian trade colonies. The importance of this find is hard to overestimate. Previously, it was believed that such artifacts were used exclusively in commercial centers of central Anatolia, like Kultepe and Asamhoik. The presence of such a seal in the West undeniably proves the deep integration of Western Anatolian settlements into transcontinental trade networks. These networks connected East and West as early as the beginning of the 2nd millennium BC. Similarly, in Tavsanli Hoyak, archaeologists found unique 500-year-old idols made of marble, bone, and clay. These included 7 anthropomorphic figures placed near a hearth. These findings lift the veil on early Bronze Age ritual practices and testify to highly developed, specialized craftsmanship. In addition, the discovery of a Minoan bronze dagger with silver rivets during underwater excavations near Kamluka confirms the intensity of maritime contacts. It shows strong connections between the Luwian shores and the Cretan civilization. If we talk about the cities themselves, they always had a massive, well-fortified citadel. Royal palaces and main sanctuaries towered upon it, physically and ideologically dominating the lower residential city. A special mention should be made of the mass use of orthostats. These are large, carefully carved stone slabs that line the lower parts of the walls of palaces, temples, and monumental city gates. In addition to protecting mud brick walls from moisture, orthostats performed a colossal visual propaganda function. Their surface was decorated with reliefs depicting scenes of triumphant military campaigns, religious processions, and elite hunting. They broadcasted the inviolability of royal power and support from the gods to subjects and foreign envoys. Another outstanding contribution to architecture was the Bit Helani. This was a specific type of palace building with a wide portico supported by columns. The religious system of the Luwians is a fascinating example of theological synthesis. It harmoniously combined the oldest Indo-European mythological heritage with powerful Anatolian and later Mesopotamian ideological innovations. It is important to emphasize that unlike the official Hittite state religion, which was deeply influenced by the pre-Indo-European Hattian population of central Anatolia, the Luwian pantheon retained a much clearer Indo-European core. The structure of the Luwian pantheon had a clear hierarchy. Deities of nature and cosmic order stood firmly at the top. The absolute leader among them was Tarhuntz, the supreme god of thunder, lord of the weather, and a mighty warrior. This bearded giant, armed with a double axe and a bundle of lightning bolts, was usually depicted on the back of a sacred bull. He not only granted fertility to the land, but was also used to legitimize the king's power. Interesting fact, linguists consider his special epithet, Pegasus, to be the basis for the name of the famous Greek Pegasus. Other mighty forces shared the heavens beside him. There was the supreme god of the sun and justice, Tuod, who was respectfully called Father, and the winged moon god Ama, who was a true favorite of the common people. The heavenly family was complemented by Tide's wife, the goddess of magic and healing, Komrasepa. Her power was indispensable in myths about purification and in medical rituals. Their son Runtia was responsible for the earthly world. He was the god of wild nature and hunting, always depicted with a bow, riding his sacred animal, a deer. The complete opposite of this harmony was Shanta. He was the fearsome god of war and destruction, who struck terror into enemies. His cult would later, in the times of antiquity, even be identified with the image of Heracles. Well, this grandiose picture was completed by the great mother goddess Kubaba. Holding the mirror of the soul and the pomegranate of the underworld in her hands, this mighty patroness of the city of Carchemish eventually expanded her influence far to the west. She became the direct prototype for the famous Roman Cybele. In addition to the official state cult, Luwian religion was deeply permeated with magical practices and ritualism. Luwian texts describing complex magical procedures have been preserved in the Hittite archives of Hadisar. These procedures were aimed at purifying a person from sins, summoning rain during a drought, and protecting against evil spirits. The deep essence of these cults is perfectly conveyed by the famous Karatepe inscription, where the ruler pleads with the thunder god. He says, "May the heavenly Tarhuns bless this land, so that the granaries are full of grain, and the jugs full of wine. May my people have countless herds of cows and flocks of sheep, and may they multiply every day." It would seem that under the protection of the mighty Tarhuns, and with such a rich culture, the Luwian cities should have prospered for millennia. They prayed to their gods for stability, they cleansed themselves with magic from all possible troubles. But no ritual of Komrasepa could protect them from what was coming. At the end of the 13th century BC, the ancient world faced a catastrophe of unprecedented proportions. The gods seemed to have turned away from their peoples, and the so-called Bronze Age collapse began. In the late 13th and early 12th century BC, the entire eastern Mediterranean region was engulfed in an unprecedented systemic crisis. Within a few decades, powerful centralized systems collapsed. The Hittite Empire disappeared from the political map forever. The complex palace economy of Mycenaean Greece and the Aegean was destroyed. The influence of the new kingdom of Egypt was critically weakened, and the great trading cities of the Levant were burned to the ground. Large-scale migrations and aggressive military campaigns by coalitions are traditionally considered one of the most noticeable catalysts for these events. These coalitions are known from Egyptian sources as the Sea Peoples. Key information about these groups comes from the monumental inscriptions of Egyptian pharaohs. In 1207 BC, Pharaoh Merneptah recorded an attack by a coalition that included the Shurdan, Sheklish, Lukka, Terish, and Eqesh tribes. 30 years later, around 1177 BC, Ramses III depicted a battle on the walls of his mortuary temple at Medinet Habu. It was against a new wave of invaders, including the Peliset, Tgeka, Denyen, Weshish, and again the Shurdan and Sheklish. An analysis of the ethnonyms of the Sea Peoples indicates their close connection with the Anatolian and Aegean regions. The Lukka tribe is reliably identified, without any academic doubts, as the Luwian-speaking population of the historical region of Lycia in southwestern Anatolia. Some researchers also associate the Sheklish and Terish tribes with Western Anatolian regions, suggesting that the Luwian-speaking population participated in these migrations. In this context, the extremely radical and controversial theory of Eberhard Zanger about World War II seems very interesting to me. Modern historians don't really like it, but I will tell you about it anyway. So, Zanger argued that the collapse was not just a series of local disasters or migrations. It was a purposeful, coordinated military campaign. For centuries, the Hittites tried to control the Luwian states, imposing humiliating vassal treaties on them. When the Hittite Empire began to weaken due to internal conflicts and dynastic crises, the Luwian kings saw a perfect window of opportunity. Instead of being fragmented principalities, according to Zanger's theory, they united into a powerful confederation. This was the so-called Luwian League, formed to deliver a preemptive strike against their former overlord. According to Zanger, the Luwian attack triggered a chain reaction that destroyed the entire world of that time. He breaks it down into 3 phases. Phase 1. The united Luwian fleet and army attacked the Hittite Empire and its ally Cyprus from the west and south. Hadusa falls, the Hittites are destroyed, and the Luwians become a superpower. Phase 2. The Mycenaean Greeks, seeing that the Luwians have destroyed the Hittites and now control all trade, become frightened of this new empire. They gather their coalition and strike at the key Luwian port, Troy. This is the famous Trojan War. The Greeks win, but this war exhausts them to the limit. Phase 3. Hundreds of thousands of Luwians, whose cities were burned by the Greeks, lose their homes. They board ships and turn into those very mysterious sea peoples. They desperately sail south, destroying the Levant and attacking Egypt, simply for the sake of survival. Meanwhile, exhausted, Mycenaean Greece collapses due to internal rebellions. Academic science treats Zanger's theories with great skepticism. Leading historians, such as Eric Klein, author of the book 1177 BC, emphasize this point. They say there is not a single written or archaeological proof that would confirm the existence of a single united Luwian League or their coordinated attack on Hadusa. Mainstream science still leans toward the theory of a systemic collapse, drought, disruption of trade, and rebellions by starving populations. In other words, no world war. But whatever the cause of the Bronze Age collapse, one thing is certain. The Luwians did not disappear without a trace. They simply changed the form of their existence. After the fall of the great empires, even the population of the so-called Neo-Hittite states was predominantly Luwian. Meanwhile, in their canonical lands in western and southern Anatolia, they survived the apocalypse. They broke up into smaller regional groups and later entered ancient history under new names. They became the unconquered Lycians, the wealthy Lydians of King Croesus, the Carians, and the Cilician pirates. As for their magnificent bronze megacities, they became empty. This was not so much due to total physical destruction, but rather because of the economic bankruptcy of the international palace system. When global trade networks collapsed, people had to abandon the corporate cities and massae because they became impossible to maintain. They moved to protected mountain settlements, forever turning the page on the great Luwian civilization. Friends, thank you for watching this video to the end. If you liked it, please leave a like. If you haven't subscribed, please subscribe.